Hey friends, welcome back to Healedish. Today we are diving into part 3 of my story with Ted. This part of my story isn't always easy to tell, but it's where the house of cards really started to crumble. It's where I began to realize that I might have to choose between losing my life to domestic violence or facing my paralyzing fear of divorce. If you haven't listened to parts 1 and 2 yet, I would definitely recommend starting there. And thank you guys so much for letting me share my story. The me from 2018 could have never imagined speaking any of these things out loud. I really thought that each incident was a sacred marital secret that I was going to take to the grave. But this community has given me the courage to heal loudly, and for that, I am so deeply grateful. With all of that being said, let's dive in. All right, so a quick refresher of where we left off. Ted and I have decided that we are going to pack it up and move to Atlanta. We are going to chase Ted's dream of owning Disney. So we think that the way that he is going to do that is he is going to get on sets. He's going to be a big time director. And we started doing this by just being background actors. So I was getting a lot of work in this college type of scene. I would do a lot of coffee shop scenes, and I did all of the Hispanic scenes and all of that. And I was having a really good time on set. I was making a lot of friends. And because I didn't go to college, this was really the first time that I was hanging out with people who were different than me. I had gone straight from being homeschooled, going to Bethel, being a part of this ministry school, and then all of a sudden I was somebody's wife. So this was really the first time that I was able to make friends who had different ideas than me. And this definitely did start to shape how I saw the world in a very positive way. So I did want to start off and just jump in with some of these crazy red flags that I did not notice at the time. So obviously he was being abusive on and off, like I have said in the last episodes, but there were a couple things that happened that I did not realize were so insane until literally just this year. So one of those things was that he was an Uber driver. So he was doing background work, but he was also an Uber driver. And one day he came home and he had a girl's number in his phone. She had texted him and said, "Hey, this is Crystal." So you have to put yourself in my shoes. I think that I married Mr. Purity, and he's always telling me, despite the fact how bad he's treating me, that I am his dream from God and how much he loves me. And I cannot fathom a world where this man would ever cheat on me. I just really could not fathom it. But it was suspicious. So I asked him, "Who is this girl? Where did you meet her? What is going on?" And he said that he was driving for Uber. And as he was taking this girl home from the airport, he realized that she lived in our apartment complex. So he's dropping her off and he says, "Oh, I just live right over here." And she said, "You are just so safe, Ted." This is the story he gave me. She said, "You just seem so safe. And I really hate getting into Ubers with people I don't know, but you seem like such a great guy. Can I give you my number? And then every time I need an Uber, you can be my personal Uber driver." And he agreed. So they exchanged numbers. And this is the story that I got at the time. And I thought it was weird, but I also could not imagine him ever cheating on me ever. And at the time, we had very strict boundaries in our marriage. I was not allowed to really talk to guys of the opposite sex. I wasn't friends with them. I wasn't messaging them. So it was very out of the ordinary for either of us to be talking to somebody of the opposite sex. So that was one red flag. Red flag number 2, and you guys are going to shake me, okay, is one day we were laying in bed and I noticed that he had scratches on his back. And obviously my mind goes to probably where your mind is going to, but I just kept thinking this man would never cheat on me. Like there's not a way that he would actually do that. He waited his entire life just to be with me, and he talks so highly of his purity. So I asked him what these scratches were on his back, and he said that he had no idea. He said, "I must have scratched my back." So I left it and I dropped it, which was wonderful. And just keep these things in mind, because when we start to get to the stuff that I found out this last year, I learned that Ted had been living a complete double life while we were married. I don't think I really knew who this guy was ever, which is very even surreal now to say. I mean, this is very new information, but looking back, a lot of things look pretty sketchy, I will say. So while things were better than they were in San Antonio, like I said, in San Antonio, things were really bad pretty much all of the time. The abusive incidences in Atlanta were a lot more spaced out. So he could be good for 2 weeks and then he would have an explosive incident, or there would be times where he would be good for a month and then he would have 5 explosive incidences in a row, and it would just be a very bad couple weeks. So I never really felt like I could predict Ted's behavior, but there was enough of a break in there where I could convince myself that maybe we've turned a corner, maybe we're doing okay. And I did want to go through a list of stories and situations that I experienced in my marriage with Ted, because I think looking back on it, I realized that yes, there was physical abuse going on in this relationship, but I had almost convinced myself that he'd only been abusive to me 3 or 4 times in our entire marriage. And that is how I felt at the time, because I didn't realize how much of his behaviors were just straight abuse. And I think that because some of these abusive tactics were so subtle, I guess they don't seem subtle in hindsight, but they felt subtle at the time. And I think it's really important for women to share their stories with abusers, because you start to realize that abusers, they must all be reading the same playbook. So let's get into some of the very toxic things that Ted would do. So 1, he would speed when we were in an argument. This is something that he really loved to do. I, unfortunately, have been in over 10 car accidents. And this was not from me driving. I just happen to know a lot of really bad drivers. So I've always been afraid in the car, and he knew that. So if we were ever in downtown Atlanta traffic, which the traffic is terrible there, he would on purpose drive 90 to 100 miles an hour to scare me. And I would ask him, "Can you please slow down?" And he would say, "I'm driving how I always drive." So he would really gaslight me and tell me that this was all in my head, that he wasn't trying to scare me. But I knew that he was trying to scare me. And there were so many times where I really thought that he was going to drive us off the road. I thought that he was going to kill me. I even got in this habit, and it's such a red flag if you feel like you need to do this, but I'm glad I did it for my personal safety, was to turn on my voice memo and record him, because I was so scared being in the car when he was speeding that I would start recording and I would say, "If we get in an accident, they're going to find my phone and they're going to know that you did this on purpose." And he would just say, "Well, I don't even know what you're talking about." So that is one form of abuse that I did not know existed at the time that I was with Ted. Another thing that he would do would be to strand me places. That was another fun one. He knew that I was very scared of Atlanta traffic. So if we were downtown and we end up getting into an argument, he and I shared one car. So what he would do would be to lock the door very quickly so that I wasn't able to get in the car, and he would strand me and drive off. Or there was another time where he would just walk off and leave me there with no money. And I was afraid that our car was going to get towed, and I would be calling him. I'd be panicking, saying, they're going to tow our car. And he would just ghost me. So there were several times where Ted would use this whole stranding thing. And you'll see this comes up later in the Disney World burger incident as well. A few more things is that he would stand behind my car so that I couldn't leave to work. That was crazy. There was one time where we were coming into the house, and I think we had been arguing in the car, and he ended up bolting, which I'm like, where did he get this energy? He ended up bolting into the apartment, locking the door. And it was, I believe, 30 or so degrees outside. And he locked me out of the apartment and he had the car keys. So I was just walking around the complex until I guess he had decided that I had been punished enough and then he would let me back in. So lots of just, I don't want to say that they're not big abusive incidences, but they were enough to where I couldn't pinpoint it and say that he was hitting me or he was hurting me in that way. So, like I said before, I had fibromyalgia and things were starting to get a bit better. I started to go to a specialist and I got put on sleep medication. So, they had found out that I was waking up, or they said I was being disturbed 10 times every hour. So, my body was constantly being woken up in the middle of the night. And they thought that that probably had a lot to do with why I was so sick. So they got me on this medication for sleep, and my fibromyalgia got, I would say, 60% better just from the sleep medicine. So this stuff was my holy grail. I needed this to function. And Ted knew, obviously, how important this medication was in order for me to not be in pain all the time. So another thing that he would do is during an argument, if he really wanted to cause me a lot of long lasting pain, he would take my medication and run to the bathroom and try to flush my medication down the toilet. And then I would have to try to take it from him. And then he is kind of gaslighting me, saying, like, how could you have grabbed that out of my hand? What do you mean? You were about to throw my medication down the toilet. And it was this very tangible way that he was trying to cause me physical pain, because he knew that if my medication got flushed down the toilet, I would not be able to get a refill for another 30 days and I would just be in agonizing pain. So it was kind of his way to, it would be his way to hurt me without actually putting his hands on me. And going back to this idea of sleep deprivation, once he realized that there was such a correlation between my physical pain and my sleep, he would start to rip the blanket covers off of me at night. So, say I am trying to go to bed, I have to be on set at 6 a.m. and I'm saying, can we please just go to bed? Can we talk about this in the morning? He would start to say, we are not allowed to let the sun go down on our anger, which is obviously weaponizing a Bible verse to try to keep me awake. And I would beg him, please, Ted, I promise we will talk about this in the morning. I promise I'm not trying to sweep this under the rug, but I have to go to bed. I have to wake up in 6 hours and I already worked 15 hours today. And he would just scream at me and tell me that I was not allowed to let the sun go down on our anger because of the Bible. And then it would get to the point where he would take the blanket and physically rip the covers off of me. And I'd get them back and he'd rip them off again. And he would just keep me awake to the point where I would only get a few hours of sleep, which sent me into a horrible pain flare. So while he hadn't been physically abusing me in the normal sense, often, at least he did sometimes, but I was being physically abused in other ways by Ted. All of these incidences really started to build. And there was one time where it was the worst time up until I finally did leave him, where I had gotten hired to be a stand-in. So this was a step up from a background actor. Everybody wants to be a stand-in. Because one, you get paid, I think, double what you get paid as a background actor, and you get the good crew food. And basically what a stand-in is you are supposed to look like the actor that you're standing in for. So I got hired for this woman who was Hispanic. She had brunette hair, and I was the same height as her, same skin tone. And my job was to stand there while they set up the lights so that she doesn't have to physically stand there while they figure out all of this technical stuff. So I got this job. It was a 2-week gig for a pilot on a TV show. It was such a big deal. I was so excited, but I did start to notice that whenever good things were happening in my life, that is kind of when Ted was the most upset. And this became such a pattern that he really would try to ruin birthdays for me, anniversaries, or any sort of personal accomplishments. So I get back from one day of this stand in job, and I think it was 10 o'clock at night. I'm so tired. I have to be back on set in the morning. And again, he picks a fight with me and he's not letting me go to bed. So I am laying in bed, and all of a sudden he charges at me, and he ended up strangling me for the first time. And I just remember I didn't even react. I just went completely limp until he got off of me. And he immediately fell to the floor and he started crying and he's sobbing and he's telling me, I'm such a bad person. I'm such a bad person. What does this say about me? Am I a bad guy? And he's crying and just sobbing on the floor while I'm sitting there still feeling his hands on me. I could still feel it even after his hands were gone. And I felt dizzy, like I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what the proper response was. And all of a sudden, I am on the floor and I am holding him and I'm telling him, no, you're not a bad guy. And it's okay. It's okay. We're going to be okay. And I think this thing just that bubbled out of me is this idea of wanting to love the person in front of you. It goes back to how I really did value vulnerability and I hated shame. It was something I really disliked. And I thought that I had to prove to people that they were lovable, even when they thought that they weren't. So when I have my husband on the floor crying, saying that he's such a bad person, I felt this need to tell him that I still loved him and I wanted to be there for him. Now, looking back on it, obviously, this is so toxic. And I think that he was definitely trying to deflect and get me to comfort him, which I did end up doing. And I did end up being stern with him later on. I did tell him, hey, listen, if you ever put your hands on me again, I am going to get divorced. And that was big for me to say because I had said so many times, Ted, I'm never going to get divorced. Nothing could make me get divorced. And this was the first time that I had kind of laid it down and said, if this happens again, then I am leaving. But that wasn't even the first night. I didn't say that the first night. The first night I was just kind of trauma bonded and didn't know what to do. So I went to bed. I woke up the next morning. I had to go to set. And I just remember feeling like I could not tell anybody. Like I could not tell anybody in my life because if I told them what he did, they would hate him forever, which in my mind, valid. If I had any friend who told me that their boyfriend did that to them, then I would hate that guy. I would never support that relationship. And I knew that. So I felt like I could not tell anybody in my life what was going on until I was ready to leave. Like the only way that I would ever share this information is if I had decided that it was so far gone that I was done. But I just could not keep it in. So I show up to set and they're setting up the lights around me. And I was talking to one friend. I'll call her, I was going to call her Sarah, but I already used that name. I'll call her Chelsea. And we're sitting across from each other, my fellow stand-in. And I just started crying as they're setting up the lights. And I was so embarrassed because I knew all of these crew members. I knew them from other sets. And I couldn't keep it together. And she was like, what's going on? And I whispered to her that my husband had choked me. And it's strange looking back on it and knowing that I opened up to her because we were not that close. We had gone to coffee once, I think. But it was a lot easier to open up to somebody who I wasn't close to, because if I opened up to my family, like I said, it would blow up my entire life. So I found comfort in opening up to somebody who was so disconnected from my life. This girl did not know Ted. She would probably never meet Ted. And I could keep these things relatively separate. So I went through the rest of the day and I was on the verge of tears. And what's so funny looking back on this, I guess it's just interesting how life works out. But I worked on that set for 2 weeks and I got no pictures of me on the little monitor or anything like that. But that day was the one day that people sent me photos of me on set. So I have these very eerie, kind of sad photos of me as they're setting up the cameras. And I can just see how lost I looked and how much I was really just trying to keep it together. And all of this in my head, I never really thought, okay, I'm going to leave him at this point. I felt like I did want to try to give it one more go and give him an ultimatum. And a lot of that was, like I said before, the prophecy, this belief that God really wanted me to be with Ted, my huge fear of divorce. And the other one was this confirmation that he was an answer to prayer. So I know I had said that you should remember the date 11/25, November 25th. And I realized that I forgot to tell you guys what that meant. So remember, I had prayed that prayer to God. And I had said, God, please send me a husband. Please send me somebody for me to spend my life with. And I promise I will serve you. So it just so happened that exactly 1 year later, on November 25th, I got married to Ted. And I did not do that on purpose. When we picked that wedding date, we picked it because it was right after Thanksgiving and it worked out with the venue that day. So I remember during our engagement, I ended up finding this voice memo that I had written, and it was November 25th. I prayed God would send someone to me. Exactly 1 year later, I was being married, or I was getting married to Ted. So I felt so confirmed that this was God's will for my life, that God had actually answered my prayer and sent Ted to me. So that was just a whole other mental leap that I would have to do, that maybe it was all just a coincidence and maybe the prophet was lying and or maybe I had just misunderstood, but that was a very big leap for me to make at that time. So I decided after that first incident that I was going to stay married. So now we are entering 2019 and I got this really cool job opportunity, which I fully thought, guys, that I was going to be unalived on a job interview. So I had decided that I was having a lot of fun on sets and I was still going to do this on the side, but I wanted something a little bit more stable. So I decided that I was going to try and get a nanny job. So I went on Sitter City and I was just looking for anything stable that I could find. And I had already found one nanny job. I was doing that and it was during the mornings, but I wanted to see if I could find another one. That way I could just work full time as a nanny. So as I'm on Sitter City, I get this woman reach out to me. She says, hey, can you come to my house? I'm going to be in town for the next, I think it was 4 or 5 months. And can you come to my house and have a job interview? So immediately, I didn't really want to go to some stranger's house on the first meeting. On the other job I had, we had met at a coffee shop first, but I decided, okay, this is really good money and it's a short commitment. It's not forever. So maybe this would be good. So I decided that I was just going to Google her name because I just wanted to make sure that no police reports came up or anything like that. So I Googled this woman's name and all of a sudden I am seeing red carpet photos and I am seeing her with her famous husband on a lot of red carpets. And I thought that I was being catfished 100%. I thought there is no way that this is real. But it was. So I decided to risk it. I went to the house praying that I was not about to be kidnapped, but turns out it was real. I had a job interview with them. It went really well. And they hired me on the spot to nanny for their kids. And This was one of the brightest spots of my time in Atlanta. I think being with this family gave me a lot of self-confidence, and it really helped open my eyes to a different kind of life that I could have. So I started to nanny for this family, and we hit it off so much. We bonded, we got really close. I absolutely love these kids. And they even loved Ted. They invited Ted to different events, and they thought positively of him because obviously I was only telling them positive things about him. But behind the scenes, Ted was really starting to panic. He was starting to feel like he was nervous about me being around people who were liberal because he was very, very conservative. And he was afraid that if I spent time with these liberal people from Hollywood, that I was going to change. And this was already a sticking point because we had already been starting to have these conversations where I was telling him that I was starting to question things that I had been taught at Bethel. I was starting to question Bethel's support of certain people. I'm sure you can guess who they are. And I was telling him that none of this felt godly to me, and that the more that I was spending time with God one-on-one, a lot of Bethel's values did not really align with me anymore. And I had seen at this point firsthand how painful and traumatic it was to be someone with a chronic illness and be involved in these Bethel circles. So, for example, I had a lot of people DMing me constantly and trying to sell me things, to try to heal my fibromyalgia. But I also had Christian friends who were telling me that I just needed to have faith, or that I must have unbelief and I need to spend time in the word, and that maybe this was a demonic attack. And if I was just closer to God, I wouldn't be experiencing pain. And the amount of victim blaming that was put on me when I had fibromyalgia, it really soured me on this charismatic circle, because I was finally getting a taste of my own medicine. I was finally realizing, hey, this actually really hurts to be told that there's more I could be doing to get healed. And I just didn't feel that there was sufficient empathy coming from the church. So at this time, we are just really starting to not agree. And there ended up being this situation, which I'm sure some of you are familiar with it because it made national news. It was picked up by BuzzFeed. They ran a whole article about it, where there was this little girl named Olive from Bethel, and Olive had passed away, and I believe she was 2 or 3 years old. And the parents had asked Bethel, can we please pray that God will raise our daughter from the dead? And Bethel Church started this movement called #WakeUpOlive. So I started to see this all over my feed. I started to see friends from Bethel posting this, and it was all over Twitter. It was a huge deal that this random church out in Redding, California was trying to raise a toddler from the dead. And this continued on for days. And I think it was 5 or 6, 7 days that they were trying to raise her from the dead. And Bethel was saying, we are going to host these 24/7 prayer events, and we just believe that God is going to do this. And it was so sad. The mom was posting things on social media every day saying that today is a great day for resurrection. And I never blamed the parents for this ever, because this is arguably like the worst thing that you could ever go through. And I thought to myself, if I was in this environment and my child passed away, and the church is telling me that if I just believed enough, that if I had just full out faith, not a doubt in the world that God was going to raise my child from the dead, that she would, then I would also be posting on social media. I would also be saying, I fully believe that God is going to raise my child from the dead. And I would be begging everybody to pray alongside of me. So I just had so much empathy for this family, and I was so mad at Bethel that they were encouraging this, because I felt like this was not okay and this was not healthy. And I was embarrassed to be associated with this place because a lot of people knew that I had been to Bethel. So I had people saying, hey, is this that school you went out to? Because there are total whack jobs over there right now. So while I am having all of these thoughts that these parents should be in grief counseling and that this doesn't really align with what I believe anymore, Ted was so mad at me that I wasn't praying for her to be raised from the dead. And he blew up on me and told me that I, Jubilee, was the reason that Olive wasn't going to be raised from the dead, that specifically my unbelief was why she wasn't going to be raised. And this was really the pinnacle of us realizing how incompatible we were, because at this point we had still been trying to fake it, that we were still compatible. And he just said, you're not even a Christian anymore. And that couldn't have been further from the truth at the time. I was telling him, no, I am a Christian. I promise I'm always going to be a Christian, but I just don't think that this is right. So this was a very big sticking point for us at the time. So during the 6 months before me finally deciding to leave Ted, things really began to escalate. We had been invited on a cruise. We went on a cruise with some friends. And I remember that entire cruise, I thought that maybe Ted was going to throw me overboard. And I felt sick to my stomach because I was afraid to stand close to the balcony when I was with him, because there was just something in me that felt like he was capable of taking my life. And what's so crazy is I would tell him that. I would tell him, like, I'm scared of you. I'm afraid you're going to kill me. And he would look at me and say, that is so dramatic. How could you ever think that I would do that? So it's weird because I had all of these feelings, but I was still an open book because I'm such an open person. So I would be very frank with him and say, I am scared that you are going to kill me. And he would just say, it is so outlandish that you would ever think that I would hurt you. Meanwhile, there are incidences where he is hurting me. He had strangled me. He had almost broke my finger one time when we went to Disney. We went on a Disney trip and that happened. And during this time, I really started to hide things in our house that I was afraid that he could use to kill me. So he never noticed because he didn't really cook much, but I took all of our kitchen knives that were sharp and I hid them in a cabinet because I was really afraid that during an argument, he might grab this and hurt me. And I think the reason too why this was such a big deal in my head was this was around the time that Chris Watts had killed his wife and children. And I remember this so vividly, laying in bed and reading the details of what Chris Watts had done to his family. And Ted was asleep in bed next to me. And I'm staring at my little phone light and I just couldn't stop reading it because I was looking for warning signs. I was trying to figure out, is my husband capable of doing what this man did? And I felt like the answer was yes. I started to see people come out and talk about Chris Watts and say, we never would have thought Chris Watts would do this. He seemed like such a good guy. And I immediately thought to myself, if Ted killed me, there are so many red flags that I'm ignoring. And I wouldn't be surprised, to be honest, if that ended up happening to me. So I started to post on Reddit, which, I mean, this was just me shouting into the void because I felt like I had nobody in my life that I could talk to. But I posted on Reddit and I said, my husband did this. Is that abuse? Am I safe? What do you guys think? And I did have some Christians who were very nice to me and told me that I should get divorced. But I also was met with some people who were like, well, what did you do to make him mad? Sounds like you're toxic. And I really took that to heart because that is what I was hearing from Ted. So there was this one circumstance that I fully believe kept me married for another 6 months to a year. I don't exactly remember when this happened. The timeline of all of these things do kind of blur together. I mostly just remember San Antonio and Atlanta, but there was a time where I was sitting on the couch and Ted was standing above me, and he ended up starting to make fun of everybody in my life. So he started, specifically the women, started to say, you know, you're such a victim, just like every other girl in your family. And I was so shut down. I I would just not say anything. And that is kind of how I was with Ted. Whenever he would come at me and cuss at me, I just didn't say anything and I went completely silent. So he is saying all of these horrible things about my family members, making fun of them for the abuse that they have suffered. And he specifically started to say something so horrible about one family member that I've never even shared it because it's just so upsetting. And I also want to protect that family member from what he said. But I felt something in me like rise up. It was so atrocious what he had said that I stood up and I ended up going up to him and I pushed him. And this was the only time, guys, that I had ever done anything physical with Ted. And I hated myself for it. I felt so ashamed that I had pushed him. But when I pushed him, he ended up taking my body and picking me up from my hips, and he ended up body slamming me on the floor of our apartment. And I ended up getting this really horrible bruise on my hip. I couldn't walk without pain for a few days. And I just was crying to him and saying, how could you do this? How could you do this? Because that was the first time, other than the first strangling incident, where he had really caused me bodily harm. And he said, well, you came at me. This was all you. You deserved exactly what I did to you because you put your hands on me first. And I believed him. I really thought, okay, well, I guess that was all my fault. I guess I deserved, or I got what I had coming to me. And he ended up telling me, if you ever divorce me, so this is straight emotional blackmail. He said, if you ever divorced me, I would tell everybody that you were abusive to me. And I was so scared of what other people thought at that point in my life. I was so scared of being bad. And the idea that he would go and spread lies about me and say that I was the one who had put this physical aspect into our relationship when there had been years of him doing things to me. I was just so scared of that I felt like I couldn't divorce him because I thought that my name was going to be smeared. And I'll talk about it a little bit more later on, but I did come to realize, I'm sure some of you who are listening, you're familiar with this phrase, that this was reactive abuse, which a lot of people don't like that term, but essentially it's when they poke and they're trying to get a rise out of you so that they can do something back to you. And this is the most textbook example. The things that he was saying were so atrocious. And looking back on it, it's so blatant to me that that's exactly what Ted was trying to do. And I carried so much shame over that incident. And I really did just kind of brush away him body slamming me because I thought I deserved what he did. So in December of 2019, I ended up getting a job offer from the people who lived in LA. They were there shooting for a movie and the movie was wrapping up. And we had bonded so much during this time. They were absolutely wonderful to me. And they asked me if I wanted to move to LA and be their permanent nanny. And I thought that this was everything that we could have ever hoped for because here we are, we know people in the industry to the point where, I mean, when I was nannying for these people, I was getting invited to their Christmas parties where they had like A-list celebrities there and they my employers were so kind that they told me that I could stay. And I played board games with them. And I feel like I'm living this crazy sector of life where these people have welcomed me in and they have made me feel so comfortable. And now they are wanting to whisk me away to LA to be their nanny. And I thought that Ted was going to be so happy about this because we had connections in the industry and maybe he would be able to make his dreams come true. So when I talked to this family about the details of this, they ended up giving me a written proposal of how much they were going to give me. They said that they were going to give me a certain amount of money for moving expenses. And they also said that on top of all of that, that they were going to try to connect Ted to people in the industry. They said, we are going to introduce him to people. We're going to try to get him on sets. So to me, this is a win-win situation because this is exactly why we moved to Atlanta in the first place. So when I tell Ted about this, I am on cloud nine. I'm thinking he is going to be over the moon. And that was not his reaction. He actually was very against this. And I didn't understand it at the time. I kept asking him, what is this? Why are you not happy? This is exactly what we wanted. And he ended up telling me after some poking, he was so honest, actually, which I think is really funny about Ted. He could really be honest at times, and I'd be surprised that those words would come out of his mouth. But he said, the reason I don't want to move to LA is if we move there, I am afraid that you would thrive and that you would be happy and that you would become an atheist and that you would leave me. So I would rather just not move because I think we're going to get divorced if we move to LA. So I just kept promising him that's not true. I'm so dedicated to this marriage, which I was. And I just kept telling him, as long as you don't put hands on me again, I promise I can forgive you. I promise I can get past it. And I really did mean it. I really felt like I could get past all of the darkness of our past as long as he just stopped. And it's something that I would just constantly be begging him, just like from here on out, please stop. But he was just so afraid that I was going to leave him. So we kind of put this job offer on the back burner. So I think that this was offered to us towards the end of December. And I think it was January, maybe 5th or 6th, I was going to be running a race at Disney World. So we had decided, okay, until we get back from the Disney trip, we are not going to make any big decisions. We're going to take this time and then we're going to decide what we were going to do. And I forgot to say this, but while my fibromyalgia was getting better, I had been reading a bunch of self-help books and I wanted to prove to myself that I could do something hard. So I decided that I was going to start training to run a half marathon and that I was going to run this half marathon with my cousin and that this was just going to be a very big accomplishment where I could prove to myself that despite the fact that I had chronic pain, that I could do hard things. So I had been training for this thing for, oh my gosh, probably 10 months at this point. It was something I was so dedicated to. I was running all the time. And I had done these very long runs and in preparation. So we decided that we were going to go to Disney, my cousin, his son, and Ted, and that we were going to go run this half marathon. Just me and my cousin, though. Ted wasn't going to run it. And little did I know this was going to change the course of my life. And I started sharing the Disney World burger story just a little over a year ago, which is crazy to me. And it was because a friend had asked me to just share a story time of why I got divorced. And I posted it from my car, not thinking that anything was going to come of it. And then it got over 3 million views and completely changed my life. So I'm going to get into the burger story. And there's so much leading up to it that I never got to put in that video. And your jaw will be on the floor because it was a wild day leading up to the Disney World burger. We arrived at Disney a few days before the race. That way we could just have fun and ride some rides. But little did we know that it was going to be super awkward. And I was a little taken aback by this because Ted and I used to go to Disney all the time. And that was actually one of the only things we were good at was whenever we went to Disney, we had a great time and we really just had our groove of doing things. So when we went with my cousin, I thought, okay, this is going to be perfect. We're going to go. Who could be unhappy at Disney? Little did I know that Ted was going to be so weird with my cousin. So, for example, when we were at the parks, we would say, "Hey, do you want to ride this ride, Ted?" And he would say, "No, I don't want to ride that ride right now." And he just seemed so upset. It was like anytime we mentioned that we wanted to do something or maybe we wanted to go get a certain snack, he wanted nothing to do with it. And it was so weird because I had not seen him act this steamy in front of my family. And I really didn't know why he was upset. And it got to the point where my cousin ended up coming up to me and pulling me aside and saying, "Hey, is something wrong with Ted? Like, did I do something? He seems really upset." And I just felt like I needed to cover for him. I didn't really know what was going on, and I was hoping that it would just get better. So the day before the race, we had really wanted to ride this new Star Wars ride. So I think it was Rise of the Resistance had just come out, and they had this system where you had to wake up, and they still have the system for some of their newer rides, where you have to wake up really early, get on the app, and try to reserve a time slot to be able to ride this ride. So Ted was the person who was in charge of arranging this ride that day. And we really wanted to ride it because it was the brand new ride. So when we finally wake up, Ted tells us that he was only able to get this ride for himself, which suspicious. But he said that for some reason, that's all that he was able to do. And we just wanted to make him happy because he had been so weird that day that we were like, "Oh, well, that's a bummer, but sure, that's fine. That's okay. We hope you have a lot of fun riding it." So we had been at Animal Kingdom, I believe, all day, or maybe it was Magic Kingdom, but we had been somewhere else and we needed to head on over to Hollywood Studios so that he could go and ride this ride during this specific time slot. So we're sitting in the car waiting for him. And the car is hot. I mean, we had on the AC, but it's Florida. Okay. So you feel really hot. And he went in and he still had to wait in the queue. So we are in the car for a couple hours while he is off riding this ride. And we're just chilling, waiting for him to be done. So later that night, it is the night before the race. Now, these Disney races start at, I think it's 5 in the morning, 5:30. So you have to get there, or at least you have to wake up by 3 a.m. These are so early because you are supposed to be pretty much done running by the time the parks open. So I am trying to get to bed at a good time. My goal was to be asleep by 7 or 8 o'clock at night. So I am getting ready for bed. I'm winding down and I tell him, "I'm so glad that you had fun on that ride," because he just kept talking about how amazing it was. And I said, "It's really sad. I really wish that we could have ridden it." And you guys, he said, "Well, you could have actually, and I just chose not to." And immediately I paused. I looked at him. I was like, "Wait, what do you mean? You told me that you weren't able to get us tickets." And he said, "Well, actually, I could have. I just didn't add you guys to the reservation." So I start to ask him, "Wait, why? You did that on purpose so that you could go and ride it by yourself?" And he just shuts down and refuses to explain himself. He will not explain why he forced us to sit in the car for 2 hours while he went and rode this thing by himself. And we obviously start arguing because I'm like, "That is really uncool. That's really selfish. Why would you do that?" And he is just refusing to apologize. But all at the same time, I decide I need to go to bed. So I'm trying to sleep. I tell him we'll talk about it tomorrow because this obviously is not going to be solved tonight. And he starts to tell me that I'm not allowed to let the sun go down on my anger. So he starts ripping the blankets off of me. He's telling me that I'm not allowed to go to bed, despite the fact that I have to wake up at 3 a.m. And at this point, he is starting to yell at me. He's being very loud. And the only reason that my cousin didn't hear this was him and his son had on white noise, so they couldn't hear what was going on. And I think that they had already gone to sleep. So at one point, I was really scared and I took out my phone. I started to record him because I was afraid that he was going to hurt me. And I ended up telling him, "You can't hurt me here. My cousin's here. My cousin would protect me." And he starts to say, "Well, I'll beat your cousin up." And he starts to threaten my cousin who is in the other room. So this just continued to go on for so long. I believe I didn't go to bed until 1 a.m, which he made it to where I only got 2 hours of sleep before this huge race that I had been preparing for 10 months at this point. And like I said, this is just something that Ted would do to try to sabotage anything good happening in my life. And as I have educated myself on domestic violence, I have learned that this is a very, very common tactic with abusive men. So I wake up the next morning and my cousin and I run this race, and surprisingly we finished, and it was actually such a great time. I'm so thankful that that memory was not ruined for me. And during the race, Ted decides, okay, now I am a very supportive husband. So he is texting me throughout the race and saying, "I see you at mile 10. I'm so proud of you." And he is just kind of love bombing me and being kind again while I'm actually running the race. Now, he had to take my cousin's son and babysit him for literally 3 hours. Okay, this was nothing crazy, but I could tell that Ted was upset that he had to watch my cousin's son. So they meet us at the finish line, and I am on cloud nine, having proven to myself that I can have fibromyalgia and run this half marathon. And Ted was happy for us at the finish line at first, but I kid you not, by the time we made the trek to the car, he's over it. He doesn't want to hear one more word about the characters that we saw on the way or just how much fun it was or anything like that. He is just very shut down. And I could tell that he was jealous that he didn't run it, despite the fact that I had asked him, "Do you want to sign up for this?" And he had no interest in running. All of a sudden, he is very jealous and he does not want to hear anything about this race. So we end up going to the Yak and Yeti restaurant at Disney World, and this is where things get crazy. So I was huge into Disney at the time. I was trying to be a Disney blogger. Like if you want, y'all can go down my feed on Instagram, and there's so many pictures of me trying to be a Disney blogger, and I was such a Disney adult. And we ended up going to the Lion King section of Animal Kingdom, and we took some pictures. I had my little handmade Mickey Mouse ears that I had made. And then we made our way to the Yak and Yeti restaurant. And I had done a lot of research on the good food to get at different restaurants at the parks, and Disney Food Blog highly recommend Yak and Yeti. They said that this place is top tier. You have to eat there. So I had made this reservation months out. I was really on top of it and I knew what I wanted to eat. I wanted to eat the Kobe beef burger, and I had just heard it was really good and I was really excited. So we get to the restaurant and we're sitting down on the second floor of this restaurant, and everything was fine at first, but then I ended up ordering my food, the Kobe beef burger, and my cousin decided that he wanted to order the tikka masala. I had asked my cousin, "Are you sure that that's what you want to get?" And he said, "Yes, that is what I want to get. I want the tikka masala." So our food ends up coming out, and my cousin is just unhappy. Like I can tell he's looking at his food and he's looking at my food, and I can tell that he thinks that my burger looks really, really good and that he's disappointed with his choice. So he just kept looking at it and saying, "Wow, Juby, your burger looks so good. And I was like, thanks, it is good. So I can take a hint. And I decided to offer my cousin a bite of my burger because why not? So I asked him, hey, do you want a bite? And he said, yes. So I ended up taking my fork. This is very important. I did not hand him my burger for him to take a bite. I took my fork and I took a piece of the burger and I gave it to my cousin. Now, this was apparently the wrong move because Ted is all of a sudden really pissed off. I am telling you, he crossed his arms. He's not eating all of his food. He is not talking anymore. And it is solely just a conversation between me and my cousin at this point. And we kept trying to include him in the conversation, and he was having none of it. And we didn't know why he was upset. We couldn't really figure out what was wrong. We thought, was it a topic that we'd been talking about that upset him? But yeah, we were just completely lost. So my cousin ends up going to the bathroom after we eat. So I am left there with Ted, and our waiter comes and brings us the check. And all of a sudden, Ted is super nice and he is super flowery to this waitress and says, thank you so much. The food was so amazing. And he is just being so kind all of a sudden after he had been so freaking mean to me this entire dinner. So I did get a little sassy, okay? And I turned to Ted and I said, so you can be nice to the waitress, but you can't be nice to your wife? So yeah, maybe that was not the best thing to say because that totally set him off, because I was trying to figure out what the heck is wrong with him. Like, why is he so upset? And he ends up telling me, y'all are going to love this. He tells me that he is mad that I gave a bite of my burger to my cousin and didn't offer it to my husband first because that is disrespectful to him as the man at the table. And he was genuinely very offended and said that I disrespected him as my husband by giving him my burger. So I am just taken aback. I cannot believe that he is throwing a fit over something like this. It almost felt like, are you kidding? Like, there's no way. So we start arguing and we are walking down the steps. And I'm like, that doesn't make any sense, Ted. That's not something to be upset about. And he is very adamant that I scarred him, that I hurt him by doing this. So we walk out of the Yak and Yeti restaurant and we're standing at the front and he starts to explode on me. And he is screaming at me loud, guys, to the point where there is a crowd forming around us and people are paying attention. And I am so embarrassed as he's screaming at me and telling me that I am all sorts of horrible names. He tells me that he is going to strand me in Florida, that he is going to take all of my credit cards, my license, everything, and abandon me in Florida. And he's going to drive back to Atlanta without me, and I'm going to have no way to get home. And my cousin ends up walking towards us, and he ends up walking away after we talk a bit. He said, I'll let you guys deal with this. I will see you guys later. So he goes away with my nephew and I'm left there with Ted. And I ended up trying to walk away and Ted wasn't really having it. He grabbed my arm and I said, please stop. You're acting, or we're acting like trash. I actually don't remember which one it was. But I was just so struck with how trashy we were. I was thinking, oh my gosh, we are going to end up on the internet. And despite the fact that it's him yelling at me, I wasn't yelling back at him at this point at all. And I just thought that this was so trashy to have a public fight. And I was so embarrassed and also scared that he was going to leave me here at Disney and in Florida. So we ended up going our separate ways for a little bit, I think maybe just half an hour or so. And then we ended up coming back together near the dinosaur ride and my cousin showed up and my cousin was trying to be nice to Ted. He was like, hey man, how you doing? And Ted was really like shrugging him off. He didn't want to talk about it. And the rest of the day, I was just trying to keep it together. I was trying to just make it back to Atlanta, because at this point I knew that my world had exploded. Because you have to remember, my family did not know that Ted was like this. And to have Ted do this so publicly and in front of my cousin, I knew that there was a chance that my cousin was going to go back home and tell people what he had witnessed, and that this illusion that I was married to a good Christian guy, this guy that was a gift from God, who loves me, and who I was always posting gifts that he would get me. I would say, he's the world's best husband. I completely was overcompensating, saying how much I loved him and how good he was to me. And this illusion is obviously shattered now after my cousin witnessed this. And I just wanted to get back home to Atlanta because I didn't know how to move forward at this point. So I believe that that was a half day. We were going straight to the airport after that. So Ted and I went to the airport, and I was just in a daze at this point, trying to figure out what I was going to do, because there was this thing in the back of my mind where I was really starting to think of, am I going to have kids with this man? Am I really going to be with somebody who I'm afraid could kill me and who I think is capable of committing a heinous crime like Chris Watts? And I was also just afraid of him yelling at me in front of our children. I knew that I didn't want to raise children in that sort of environment. And it got to the point where I would pray, and I had kind of made peace with the fact that maybe I would never have kids, because I would rather never have kids than subject a child to the abuse that I was under with Ted. So we're at the airport, and I am not proud of this because it just really shows how dark of a place I was in. But we got to the airport and I started drinking so much wine, like, to be completely honest with you guys. And we didn't fight at the airport or anything. We were actually sitting in complete silence until we pretty much got back to Atlanta. And I just remember having this cup full of wine at the gate, and I don't remember much from that flight or even getting back home to Atlanta, because I was really just drinking away my sorrow and my anxiety and my depression towards the situation. I just wanted everything to stop. I just wanted it to go away. And I knew that we were going to have to address it the next day. So the next day, I ended up waking up and I knew that it was time. And I told him, would you ever yell at me in front of a child? Because that's what the core of this really was, is that I needed to know that. And he ended up telling me, if you deserved it. And in that moment, I knew it was something in my gut. I just said, well, then I will not be having kids with you. And I knew that I meant it. I wasn't saying it in a malicious way. I wasn't saying it as a comeback. It was 100% genuine. I will not have kids with you if you're telling me this. And he ended up charging at me. I was laying in the bed again. It was almost the exact same situation as the first time. And he charged at me and he ended up strangling me. And it was longer this time and worse this time. And then he got up and he hit me on my hip twice, and he did the whole thing over again. He fell to the floor. He started saying, oh my gosh, please forgive me. Please forgive me. I'm such a bad person. And I didn't fall for it this time. There was something different this time where I knew that I was really scared. And I really thought that maybe maybe he was going to kill me, and I just wanted him out of the house. So, which this is so funny that I would ask him to do something so mundane, but I said, can you please go get the groceries that we need? Because we had just gotten back into town and I just wanted him out of the house. I was terrified of him. And I said, what you can do for me is leave. Like, I need space. I need you to leave. And he's just crying and he's saying, well, let me call the cops on myself. I'll call the cops on myself right now. And that's always another tactic that he would do, is he would threaten to call the cops on himself in kind of a reverse psychology way to try to get me to not call the cops. But he did agree to end up leaving. So he left to go get groceries. And I knew that I couldn't call anybody in my life. That is what I felt, that I knew at the time, that I could not call anybody in my life, because that would mean that everybody would know, and that would make the decision for me. So I decided that I was going to call the domestic violence hotline. So I call the DV hotline, and this sweet woman listens to me, and I cry every time I talk about her because she absolutely changed my life. And I told her what he did, and I said, but he's really nice sometimes. Like, he's so good to me sometimes, and he makes me feel special sometimes. And she asked, could she please take me through a list of questions? Because I told her, I don't know if I'm in an abusive relationship. And she said, well, let me walk you through a list of questions. So we went through this list of questions, and I said yes to almost every single one. I think the only one I didn't say, maybe the only one I didn't say yes to, was, has he ever abused me sexually, which he had not. And she ended up telling me that I had said yes to, I think, 13 of the 15 questions. And that's when I knew that I was in an abusive relationship, and that it hit me for the first time. I think having somebody say, this is the questionnaire and this is what you said to these answers. And I started to tell her about how he had said that he would tell everybody that I was abusive, and that he said he would smear my name. And she told me that that was so common, and that she hears it all the time, and that I didn't need to feel guilty. And I think sharing with somebody what I believed was the worst thing I'd ever done, pushed Ted, and her tell me, like, I hear you and you're okay and you're not a bad person. It really did heal something in me. So he ended up walking up the path as I'm talking to her, and immediately I'm scared. I'm scared that he's going to be mad that I called this hotline. So I said, he's coming back, I have to go. And I hung up the phone. And he came back in, he stayed for a little while, and I ended up asking him to leave again. And at that point, I decided to call my mom. And I called my mom, and I called my best friend, and they walked me through some of the hardest days of my life. I didn't know what to do, and I still was watering down what he had done. I think I said he put his hands on me to my mom. I didn't even tell her what he had done. And they reacted so perfectly. I don't even know how they reacted. So ideally, what they said was that I didn't need to decide anything. I didn't need to get divorced if I didn't want to, but I did need to come home, and that I needed space. And my mom was like, maybe you guys can go to counseling. Maybe you'll end up doing that. But what you need to do right now is to come home and be safe. So it was exactly what I needed to hear. I needed to hear that I didn't need to make a decision right now, because I think that that is what had paralyzed me for so long. And my family and friends, they were just focused on getting me to safety, which is exactly what you should do to alleviate the pressure of making such lifelong decisions, because I wasn't there yet. Like, I could not make that huge of a decision. So I decided to listen to them. And I told Ted that I wanted to go back home, and he surprisingly agreed to let me go back home, because I think he was just afraid that I was going to call the cops on him. And I ended up spending 2 more days there with him, and until my ticket was booked to come back to San Antonio. And there was this one time where I had been kind of cold to him, obviously, ever since he did that. And I hadn't kissed him or told him I loved him or anything like that. And he had told me that he loved me in passing. I think he was like, okay, I got to go, love you. And I instinctually said it back. I said, I love you too. And he fell to the floor and he started crying and weeping. And I asked him why. And he said, that's the first time you've told me you loved me since what I did. And I felt so guilty in that moment because I felt like I gave him false hope. I felt like he thought I said that on purpose and I just said it out of habit. And then I just felt this guilt that I didn't feel like I loved him. And I didn't feel like I was going to be able to get past this. So I really just tried to get through that day or two until I could get on the plane. And I phrased it to him that I just needed to take some space. I ended up kissing him goodbye at the airport because I don't know what came over me, but something came over me to where I felt like this is my husband and I'm probably never going to see him again. Because I think despite the fact that I hadn't made a decision, there was something in me that knew that this was it. And that I was really just focused on getting to safety. So when I told him I just needed space to think, part of me felt like I knew I was lying, like that I was just making a safety plan. And my safety plan was to get back to San Antonio and away from this man. And I ended up kissing him goodbye because I knew that that would just be my final goodbye to him. And that was the last time that I ever saw Ted. And I ended up finding something, which I've never shared this one before, but I ended up finding this journal entry that I wrote, and I wrote it the day that I got into San Antonio. So I arrive at San Antonio, both of my parents, and I love my parents so much, both of my parents met me at baggage claim, and I just fell into their arms. And I felt like a little kid again, coming home with this potential failed marriage. And they loved me so well during that time. They just gave me a safe place to hide out. And I went home and I ended up writing this journal entry. And I wanted to share it. It's short, but it's so where my mindset was at the time. And I think it's interesting to see what I was thinking during this very pivotal time in my life. So I wrote, "My heart is completely shattered. This is not how it's supposed to be. I wasn't supposed to get divorced or even consider it. I've been firmly in the camp of making things work no matter what, but it feels like that option is being pried from my stubborn hands. How can you stay when your husband squeezes your neck? How can you stay when you're scared that the next time he will take it too far? How can I stay? I'm truly wanting an answer because I wish that I could revive this mess. I don't know what I want anymore. What I want is a healthy marriage. I don't want to be divorced, but I also can't live in this toxic, controlling bubble for the rest of my life. I pray that Jesus will understand. I feel guilty admitting it, but even if Ted were to take all of the right steps, I don't know if I have it in me to work this out or to even try. I don't know if I could ever fully trust him to not hurt me or our children. I don't know that I want to be married to someone who belittles me, minimizes my abuse, mocks my faith, and calls me Jezebel. I don't know if I want this to be repaired. I know that going home is the right thing to do for now, no matter how painful this is. I know that I need space from the situation and that Ted needs to know that this abuse cannot stand. It isn't just a matter of getting angry. It feels like this is controlling behavior that shows glimpses very often in our life together. We've always been on the same side. Even in our fights, I think, well, I don't want to get divorced, so you need to forgive him and move on. But now I'm not so sure. For the first time, I feel the weight that this may not work out. I don't view us as being on the same team. I'm certainly not against him, but I do feel like I have to be separate from us to take care of my protection. I feel empowered and selfish. I feel hopeful and distraught. I feel confident in my choice and also paralyzed with uncertainty. I keep listening to the next right thing. I can't look too far ahead. I just need to do the next right thing. And I know that leaving for now is that next right thing." This was right after Frozen 2 had come out. So that song really just played on repeat during my time of being separated from Ted. And it did not take me long to decide to get divorced. I think I thought it was going to be a longer process, but I immediately got into therapy. I'm so thankful. My parents have this family therapist who is so kind, and she got me in very quickly. And I was meeting with her, I think 2 to 3 times a week. I was going to her office, and I know that therapists are not supposed to share personal things about their lives, but she's a little funny. She'll share things sometimes. And she ended up telling me that in her first marriage, she was in an abusive marriage. And I think for me to be speaking with someone who knew exactly what I was going through, that is what I needed. And she was very Christian, very, very Christian. And to hear her kind of give me permission to get divorced. Obviously, I have different feelings about divorce now, and I don't feel the need to justify it through that lens. But at the time I did. So to have a very, very Christian woman tell me that it was okay, that I was allowed to get divorced, it really gave me a lot of freedom that I didn't have before. And I remember just crying to her and telling her, like, but the prophecy, this is God's will. God wanted me to be with him. And I think she did the perfect thing because she could have just said, well, the prophecy's fake and, it was never God's will or anything like that. But she needed to reach me on my level. And the thing that she said was, well, maybe it was God's will and he ruined it. And he can do that. And he did. So it doesn't mean it's God's will anymore. And I needed that justification in my mind to know, okay, I can say that this is too broken for me to continue with him. So I ended up calling him on the phone, and I told him that I wanted a divorce, and just hyping myself up for that phone call was so scary because he had been so sweet. He had been texting me, calling me, telling me how much he loved me. He told me he was going to sign up for an abuser program, which is crazy that he was willing to do that because I read about it in a book called Why Does He Do That? And they were saying that that is the most effective therapy for abusive men. And he found one in the area. He signed up. He was going to go. I got a call from the lady at the center. And I felt a lot of pressure at that time because it felt like he was doing everything I asked him to do. So it was hard to tell him, hey, I know you're doing everything, but I still want a divorce. And I did. I told him, and he immediately broke down crying. And he told me, please don't do this. Please don't do this. And I was very firm and decided. And this was only after a few weeks of being separated. And he immediately stopped crying once he realized that I was decided. And he got really stone cold. And that was the end of that. We didn't talk on the phone anymore. And I ended up going to Atlanta, filing for divorce. And a lot of this is going to have to wait till next episode. I'll talk to you guys about what it was like to heal during this time. I was a complete mess after I decided to get divorced, and I wouldn't necessarily recommend getting on dating apps the second you file for divorce, but I did. And I ended up meeting the love of my life, who has absolutely just healed my heart. And I'm so thankful for the life that we've built together. So I really want to, in the next episode, talk about the beginning of our relationship, what it was like to be in a healthy relationship after being in such an abusive one, and the process of my deconstruction, and then also what happened to Ted after, because I did get some updates on the people that he dated after me. To remember that girl, Sarah, that he had dated before we started dating. Turns out I did not get the full story about Sarah. There was some crazy abuse that happened there before that the church knew about and hid from me. And it was just a disservice to both of us. And I learned all of that this year. So there is a lot to get into in the next episode. And just thank you guys for listening to my story. It's always healing to tell it, because I think I love that when I tell it, it doesn't feel like my story so often because it just feels so far away. And it's hard to imagine that I put up with so much for so long, but the indoctrination of the church and also just the subtle abuse from Ted, it made it really confusing to name what I was going through at the time. And I'm just so thankful that I've been able to share on TikTok, Instagram, and now on this podcast about domestic violence. It is the core of my being is to raise awareness about domestic violence and religious abuse. So thank you guys so much for being here. That is it for this episode of Healed-ish. I will see you guys next time.